There's a truth narcissists never want you to know. The moment you silently walk away without a single word of blame or complaint, you set off a profound internal collapse within them. They'll pretend to be strong, post smiling photos, and flaunt new relationships as if nothing happened. But behind that mask lies a storm of emotions, a quiet breakdown they cannot control. In today's video, we'll explore the 5 psychological stages a narcissist goes through after you leave. Not to gloat, but to help you realize that you're stronger than you ever imagined. If you've ever been manipulated or loved someone who never truly loved you back, watch this video until the end. And if this journey resonates with you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so we can continue walking together on this meaningful path of healing and awakening. 1. Stage 1, denial when reality becomes unacceptable. You'll leave quietly, without an explosion, without blame, without retaliation. And that, your calm, is exactly what starts the internal collapse of the narcissist. They want you to believe you're nothing, that your absence creates no void, that they're happier now than ever before. They project this through radiant pictures, status updates crafted with deliberate indifference, and a calculated silence used like a weapon. Every action serves one single goal, making you feel insignificant, as if you're merely a passerby in the glorious story they're writing for themselves. But don't let appearances fool you, because if you're brave enough to leave without looking back, you've done something they never anticipated. You've removed the mirror that reflects the false image they depend on to survive. For others, a breakup may be a painful loss that heals over time. But for a narcissist, it's catastrophic. They didn't love you for who you are. They needed you as a mirror. You reflected the image they desperately wanted. Someone admired, desired, envied. You were their stage for performance, their audience to emotionally control, their supply to feel validated. When you walked away, you didn't just end the relationship. You dismantled an entire psychological energy supply system they'd built around you. That's why they must pretend they're fine, posting smiling pictures, telling others you're too dramatic or unstable. Not because they truly believe it, but because they must believe it to avoid collapse. Their self in pictures so fragile that admitting you left because you discovered the truth would shatter all the illusions they've wrapped around their ego, breaking like glass into tiny fragments. You'll likely never see them cry, never hear them beg you to return, because that would force them to show weakness, something their prideful ego can never permit. Instead, they choose to perform. They construct a narrative where you're at fault and they're the resilient hero rising above it all. They'll never say, I miss you. Instead, they'll say, I'm fine, I've moved on. But what they don't say and what they cannot face is the reality that deep inside, a quiet panic is silently erupting, because what you took away wasn't just love, it was control. Without you, there's no one left to manipulate, no one to steer emotionally, no one to dominate the atmosphere of a room. There's no one left to sulk around, forcing others to pacify them, no one to draw into the endless cycle of silence, sweetness, then silence again. Every old control tactic becomes meaningless without you caught in that whirlwind. You think they've forgotten you? They haven't. They're silently watching you every day, quietly viewing your stories, reading your statuses, analyzing every expression in the photos you post. They're desperately searching for evidence that you still care, that you're still affected. Even the slightest reaction, a message, a like, a comment, is enough to reassure them they still have power. But you don't respond. You maintain silence, you walk away without explanation, and that's precisely what throws them off balance. Because for the first time, they can't control the narrative. They once thought you were weak, too emotional, too sensitive, too easily hurt. But now, you're the one decisively ending things. You're the one who's stopped reacting, stopped holding on, stopped falling for their old tactics. And that forces them to face the harshest truth. They've never been as strong as they believed. You weren't just their lover. You were the only light illuminating the real part of them. The part they hide even from themselves. When you left, that light vanished. And darkness is a place where the narcissist dares not linger too long. Don't ever think you're just someone who walked away. You are the starting point of truth. And truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually erupt when no one remains to uphold the lie. 2. Stage 2, silent rage and unnamed panic. When your silence doesn't just strip their power, but makes them lose themselves. You don't respond. Not a single message, not a glance backward, no explanation. And that's when the rage begins to build. But it's not typical anger. It's a fury born from losing control, from a deep wound inflicted on the fragile yet seemingly invincible ego of a narcissist. When denial is no longer strong enough to keep them stable, they slip into a second stage, anger and panic. And the scariest part, they'll never admit it's because they're afraid of losing you. Instead, they'll insist you're unworthy, that you never truly understood them, or that they've found someone better. But that's merely a shield. Behind it is a storm of emotion they don't know how to manage, a growing emptiness that intensifies because you're no longer available as their emotional supply. In their mind, your silence is rebellion. They can't fathom how you no longer need them. You used to be someone who always tried to understand them, endured their moods, waited patiently for them to wake up. But now you're silent, not to manipulate, but to heal yourself. And this deeply threatens them. No one leaves a narcissist without consequences. That's a rule they've taught themselves. Yet, here you are, breaking that rule with a calm that borders on cold indifference. They begin to react, not with genuine apologies, but with toxic attacks. They'll say, I knew you were weak, or I've found someone who deserves me. Yet, hidden within those words is an unspoken plea. Please let me retain a little power. They're not expressing genuine feelings. They're trying to provoke you, because even one reaction from you, a reply, a flash of anger, would be enough for them to feel they still exist within you. If you react, they win. If you remain silent, they collapse. And when you still don't respond, they escalate. They flaunt new relationship. They post affectionate photos. They subtly mention places you want to share, not out of happiness, but to make you hurt. These seemingly harmless gestures are strategic. They're playing a game. Who will blink first? But you don't blink. You maintain your silence. No comments, no messages, no falling into traps of jealousy. And that's when panic creeps in. They no longer understand you. They can't predict your actions anymore. And when a narcissist can no longer anticipate their target's responses, they spiral into profound disorientation. At this point, they might begin sabotaging not just you, but also their surrounding environment. They spread rumors about you to your friends, family, and colleagues. They fabricate stories in which they're the victim, the one abandoned, the one betrayed, not to gain sympathy, but to reclaim control over your image. If they can't control you, they'll control how the world perceives you. Sadly, these actions don't soothe their inner panic. Instead, they plunge deeper into emotional turmoil. They may immerse themselves in work to escape feelings, or conversely sink into addictive behaviors to temporarily numb their pain. But no matter what they do, equilibrium eludes them. Because that equilibrium once came from you, from the way you looked at them, listened to them, and tried to understand them. Now that gaze is gone. Most frightening at this stage is that they may pretend to come back as the good person. They'll suddenly act kind, send affectionate messages, and even apologize. But stay alert, that's not genuine awakening. It's a tactic. If you soften, they'll re-enter your life as if nothing ever happened, restarting the game. Only this time they'll be smarter, more sophisticated, and more toxic. You see, they're battling their helplessness by grasping at whatever scraps of power remain. And if you hand it back even a little, you reignite their addiction to control. But if you continue to maintain silence, refusing to return, their rage slowly turns to desperation, a desperation without escape. There's an important truth to remember. A person who genuinely doesn't care never needs to prove anything. But narcissists are different. They need you to see they're fine, because deep down, they know they're not fine at all. And when every attempt fails, when you remain the impenetrable wall they can't climb, they begin to experience the emotion they've always fled from, emptiness. Because that's when they're preparing to enter the third stage, reconstructing their ego through replacement. But before they move into that phase, understand this. All the dramatic acts they're displaying now aren't because you're unimportant, but precisely because you're the first person who never looked back. And that, for them, is a wound no performance can ever hide. Stage 3, rebuilding the ego through replacement, when they try to fill the void with another shadow, only to realize they're slowly losing themselves. When rage no longer reaches you and every attempt to manipulate, provoke, or trigger you has failed, a cold truth begins to surface in the narcissist's mind. You've genuinely stepped beyond their sphere of control. And for someone who thrives on illusions of power, this feels like being deprived of oxygen. They no longer have a stage to perform on. no audience to reflect back their false image. Every word, every tactic falls into the void of your silence. So they shift gears, not to heal, but to replace. Shortly after you leave, they find someone new. Not because they're in love, not because they've gotten over you, but because they can't face themselves in the silence. They desperately need another mirror, anyone, to see their own reflection, to reassure themselves they're still alive, that they still hold value, even if it's a value constructed entirely of lies. They begin this ego reconstruction stage using familiar gestures, like a script copied from the past. The intense compliments, promises of an incredible future, and dramatic displays of affection, all the tactics they once used to captivate you are now employed again, faster and with greater intensity towards someone new. But one crucial thing is missing: soul. There's no genuine connection, no profound gaze, no empathy. The new person isn't loved. They're being used like a tool, a stage prop. They're simply a vessel for the narcissist to soothe their fractured ego. They serve as a witness to a new love story, which in reality is nothing but an empty reproduction of the old script. Throughout this process, the narcissist's greatest effort isn't spent building a genuine relationship. It's spent convincing the world and themselves that they've successfully replaced you. They share affectionate photos, post romantic status updates, and publicly display their new relationship milestones as if you had never existed, but you did exist. And what they refuse to acknowledge is that you were once the only person who genuinely saw them. For all their wounds, imperfections, and darkness, they desperately keep hidden. The new person doesn't see it because they've never been shown that deeper side. And the narcissist lacks the patience required to build a genuine connection. They simply want to feel illuminated again immediately, quickly, and easily. But when this superficial connection isn't strong enough to cover the cracks in their soul, they begin to feel the absence. They miss you, not because of love, but because of how you made them feel, seen, reflected as an idealized version in your eyes. They miss your patience, how you understood their silences, and how your silence wasn't intended as punishment, but as the last remaining act of respect toward yourself. The new person might be easier, more compliant, and less challenging, but they don't make the narcissist feel special. They don't make them feel unique. And that becomes an unspoken disappointment within them. So quietly they begin to compare, not aloud, but through memories. A song might remind them of a moment shared with you. An unintended gesture recalls how you once held their hand. A quiet afternoon makes them realize the new person cannot genuinely make them feel anything real. When this truth seeps into their mind, they speed things up further. They propose early. They move in together swiftly. They constantly post pictures of happiness. Yet deep down, they understand clearly they're trying to piece together a replica of the happiness they once had with you. Happiness they never appreciated when you were by their side. Your name may no longer be mentioned, but your image remains quietly present, lingering in corners of their memory beyond their control. This silent presence irritates them, not because they still love you, but because they can't forget you, because you saw them in a way no one else ever had. You saw through them and stayed until you simply couldn't continue any longer. Your decision to leave wasn't born from weakness, but rather from the strength to choose truth over illusion. All the luxurious trips, romantic dinners, and photos filled with expressions of love than just a performance. A show staged with a singular purpose, convincing you that you no longer matter. But if you truly don't matter, why are they still performing for your benefit? Eventually, when the performance loses its audience, when the new person also begins to sense the emptiness behind sweet gestures, when the mask begins to crack piece by piece, the narcissist can no longer deny reality. They've truly lost you, not physically, but spiritually, energetically, in terms of a deep connection that they couldn't fully comprehend yet, still deeply felt. And that precisely is what's irreplaceable. No new person can fill that void because it's not a position you occupied, it's the value you once brought into their life. Stage 4, silent collapse when the noise fades away and darkness consumes what's left of their humanity. Silence. No more accusations. No more romantic photos flaunting new love. No more probing messages. Suddenly all the familiar noise from the narcissist vanishes, leaving behind a cold emptiness you once longed for. And now you realize this isn't peace. It's a sign of collapse. No one left to manipulate. No one left to reflect them. No one remaining to justify their masked existence. And thus, when the narcissist can't control you, can't replace you, and can't distract themselves from their pain with anyone else, they begin to unravel from within. They might still go to work, still smile, still share occasional bright moments on social media, but if you look closely, their eyes have changed. No longer sparkling with self-satisfaction, no longer burning, even falsely, with passion. Only emptiness remains, masked by a familiar facade, performance, acting, survival mode. In this stage, the narcissist no longer plays the role of winner. They've exhausted their source of emotional supply from others. There's no one left to control emotionally, no one left to help them avoid confronting themselves. And this forces them to face something for which they've never prepared, their own presence. Without reflection, without validation, for a normal person, silence can be an opportunity for introspection, healing, and inner reconciliation. But for someone who's never learned to sit quietly within themselves, silence is an abyss, a wordless void where every illusion breaks apart piece by piece. You might have thought maybe they're genuinely happy, but the truth is, genuinely happy people don't need to prove their happiness. Truly peaceful people don't need an audience. After all the performances, they're simply exhausted. Some narcissists throw themselves into work as an escape, overworking, setting relentless goals, pursuing achievement, not for growth, but to avoiding feelings, avoiding memories, avoiding reality. Others spiral deeper into addictive behaviors, uncontrolled partying, reckless spending, meaningless sexual encounters, or simply consuming endless content to numb loneliness. But whatever the method, they share a single goal, not to truly live, but simply not to feel. And the harder they try not to feel, the further they drift from themselves. They forget what love is, they lose track of where their pain originated. They can no longer distinguish real feelings from the roles they play. As the gap between them and their true self widens, they slip into a state of profound disconnection, a psychological phenomenon known as depersonalization, in which they feel as though they're living someone else's life, observing everything through blurred, detached, meaningless lenses. That's why they may suddenly vanish from social media, or conversely, become unusually loud. Both behaviors indicate the same underlying truth. They've lost control of their inner emotional world and are desperately trying to conceal it. This stage of collapse, they might unexpectedly hear a song you once loved, see a place you both visited, or accidentally reread an old text message. In that moment, they confront what they've always denied. You were real. Those feelings were real. And this loss cannot simply be erased by acting. They might hate remembering you, not because you hurt them, but because you remind them of themselves, the true version they refuse to develop. When you saw the person behind their mask, you didn't run. You stayed, you were patient, and eventually you walked away, not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to say, I can't keep losing myself to hold on to someone who isn't real. That's what shatters them. You want their greatest shock. It was the truth you carried. The truth that they could no longer control you, could no longer deceive you. And when there's no one left to manipulate, all their illusions of power crumble. Now, as they sit quietly alone at night, amidst the noise of their fabricated life, they're left with one haunting question. Who am I if there's no one left to see me? That question has no answer because they've consistently refused the journey to discover it. They ran from truth. They lived through roles. They loved through strategies. And now, as everything retreats, they're left facing an endless, bottomless darkness, entirely alone. You don't need to return. You don't need to check if they're all right. You don't need apologies or visible remorse to know they're collapsing inside. You once tried to save them many times. You gently showed them a different path and they refused. They chose falsity. They chose control. They chose victory over love. Now all you need to do is continue walking forward in your own firm silence, not for revenge, but to honor your truth. The truth that you love deeply, yet never lost yourself. And that is the greatest reversal of all. While they collapse from losing a mirror, you become more whole than ever. Because you've learned how to see yourself clearly without needing anyone's reflection. 5. Stage 5, awakening or total collapse. When there's no one left to blame, and only the truth remains. At the end of the journey, the narcissist stands before a crossroads that no one can avoid. All denial, rage, replacements, and performances have been exhausted. No new person remains as a reflective tool. No former partner left to manipulate. No audience to applaud their performance. It's just them alone, bare, without costumes, without scripts. This is the point at which every narcissist ultimately must face what they've spent their entire lives fleeing. Who am I when there's no one left to control? At this threshold, there are only two paths. One is awakening, letting go of the false ego, confronting the root wounds, and beginning the journey to relearn how to live authentically. The other is complete collapse, returning to the old patterns with diminished strength, depleted belief, and increasingly disconnected from themselves. The path of awakening, if it occurs, begins quietly. No fireworks, no emotional tears, no grand speeches of apology. Just a quiet, broken whisper inside their mind. I don't know who I am anymore. That's not weakness. It's the first moment their arrogant ego bows its head, and that, if they're courageous enough, can become the very first step toward truth. In rare cases like this, narcissists might seek therapy, meditation, or other forms of emotional support they once dismissed with contempt. They learn to listen, to take responsibility, not to manipulate or to be right, but because they genuinely want to understand why everything fell apart. They begin distinguishing between control and love, between performing and truly connecting, between living to be admired and living to be genuinely understood. They learn how to love, not to receive love in return, but to give without expectation. They begin to understand that the only person capable of saving them is themselves, if they're brave enough to dismantle the false self they once mistook for identity. But this path is rare because it's painful. It demands admitting their entire life was built upon illusions. It means accepting that they hurt others not because those people deserved it, but because they feared vulnerability so much they sought to dominate it first. And for many narcissists, this admission is unbearable. Thus, most choose the second path, total collapse. They find someone new, reenacting the same old scripts, but without passion. They utter loving words without believing their own declarations. They control, manipulate, and provoke jealousy, yet no longer feel victorious when others crumble. They replay themselves like a faded copy of a character they once considered powerful, but now reduced to a mere shadow. And day by day, they live without truly living, no longer believing in others, no longer believing even in themselves. They become social mannequins, saying the right words, behaving appropriately, admired from afar. But within lies a hollow core, a center devoid of emotion, connection, or internal stability. Even more frighteningly, at this stage, they might become more dangerous than ever, not because they hate anyone, but because they have nothing left to lose. They manipulate not to gain anything, but simply to reassure themselves that they still hold some form of influence. They hurt others, not because it brings them pleasure, but because it's the only language they've ever learned to manage their internal fracture. And you, the one who once loved them, who once tried to save them, must ultimately confront the painful truth. You cannot save them, nor is it your responsibility to do so. You once gave them opportunities. You once believed in the humanity you sensed behind their mask. You once hoped that if you loved enough, waited patiently enough, gave enough, they would change. But now you know that healing cannot come from outside. It must be their own choice. And if they refuse to choose, then anything you do will only delay the inevitable moment when they must finally confront themselves. They may collapse. They may remain trapped in an endless spiral. They may become a weary replica of who they once were. But none of this is your fault. It's the consequence of truths they refuse to acknowledge, even when you tried to bring light into their darkness. And one day, amid sudden silence, they may think of you, not with anger, not with blame, but with quiet regret. You were the only one who genuinely loved them, who saw them, including the parts they hid. And you were the only one brave enough to leave when love was no longer love. You didn't leave behind hatred. You left behind truth. The truth that you loved, but not blindly. That you gave, but without losing yourself. That you walked away, not out of selfishness, but because you'd grown beyond the role they needed you to play. You once wondered, do they feel regret? Do they think of me? Do they feel pain? And now you know, they may never admit it openly, but they began to fall apart piece by peace the day you chose truth over illusion. The day you stopped responding. The day you decided you didn't need an apology, validation, or a staged reconciliation. You don't need to see them collapse to know you were right. You only need to keep walking forward without looking back. Because this journey was never merely about leaving someone. It was always about reclaiming yourself. You once walked through the darkness, not because you didn't love deeply, but because you learned that true love cannot survive if it comes at the cost of your authentic self. To sacrifice, forgave, and listen until you lost your own voice. But eventually you realize silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's the loudest declaration, a call to awakening. Not for them, but for you. When you walked away, you didn't just leave a toxic relationship. You stepped out of a cycle of denial, manipulation, and performative roles. And most importantly, you walked toward the light, where your truth, your worth, and your dignity could be restored. Don't let this silence fool you. Don't let the surface image make you doubt your instincts. The truth is, no one can keep performing forever, especially when there's no one left willing to watch, and you, the one once labeled as too sensitive, too emotional, too forgiving, turned out to be the strongest of all. Because you had the courage to do what they never could. Live honestly, love authentically, and let go completely. You may never hear them admit it. There will be no apology letter, no public tears, no final closure meeting. But you no longer need those things because you've reclaimed what they lost, inner freedom, a peace that cannot be bought, and the ability to stand in the storm without needing anyone to define who you are. If this journey speaks to your heart, if you've ever felt alone, doubted for walking away, or wounded for loving sincerely, remember this. You are not alone. There are millions of others out there walking similar roads, learning how to heal, one day at a time, and you are part of them. A real light in a world full of masks. If you want to keep walking this path of healing, awakening, and healthy love with us, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us until the end of each video, because here, we don't just tell the old story, we rewrite ourselves. It may have hurt you, but today, you are living proof that truth never crumbles. And you are the one who truly won.